Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we got another news and rumor video to discuss. In today's video we're looking at a couple of signings from our past couple of days, some injury updates, a few interesting pieces of news, and we got some trade rumors involving the Wild, the Sabres, the Rangers, and a handful of other teams. Go to all the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for my June 27th, June 28th, and July 1st live streams. Don't forget to stay tuned for that. But in today's video, we got another news and rumor video to discuss. So as usual, we're talking about some signings from our past couple of days. We're just about to catch up to all the signings from our past few days. So we're looking at all the signings that happened over June 1st and June 2nd. So very interesting note there. So we have a couple of interesting signings, 8 in total here, and a couple of them are ELCs. Some of them are some very interesting extensions. So we'll get to all the updates from our past couple of days. First, the Seattle Kraken have signed right shot defensive prospect Caden Hamel, who was a 5th round pick back in the 2023 draft, to a 3-year ELC with an AV of $865,000. Hamel, I think, played last year over in juniors. Looks like a very fantastic prospect. I think eventually could challenge for a third pair role, probably not in the next year or two, but I think eventually could challenge for a defensive role in Seattle. So very interesting note there. The LA Kings have also given out an ELC as they give left shot defensive prospect Kirill Kristenov to a 2-year ELC with AV of $925,000. Kristenov, I think, was playing over in the NCAA. It might have been over in the KHL. Not exactly sure, but Kristenov is one of the top defensive prospects for the LA Kings. The Kings don't really need a whole bunch of more defensemen, but I think Kristenov, could be eventually a solid second pair defensive guy for the LA Kings. So very interesting note there. Then we saw the Seattle Kraken give out an extension to one of their pending UFAs, and that was depth forward Ben Meyers. Meyers, who is a center/left winger, gets a 1-year extension, league minimum. So it's an interesting extension there for the Kraken. Meyers played in 8 games this year at the NHL level, putting up no points, was mostly an AHL guy. So I think Meyers is going to be a solid depth guy. I could see him get 4th line minutes. I could see him start the year at the AHL level and be a call-up option. So interesting note there, but that's a pretty solid sign in my opinion. At league minimum, it's not an overly bad contract there for a guy who can play depth minutes at the NHL level. So interesting note there. Then we saw Washington Capitals sign some depth at the AHL level as they have signed Garen Bjorklund, who was a goaltending prospect, 23 years old, to a 1-year extension with AV of league minimum. So that's a very interesting note there. Bjorklund played entirely at the AHL level last year, but was a solid AHL type guy, and I think eventually might be able to be challenging for a backup role, maybe like 2 to 3 years time. So very interesting note there, but Bjorklund gets a 1-year league minimum deal and will remain with the Washington Capitals. Then we saw the Tampa Bay Lightning sign former Oiler prospect Ryan Fanti, who was a 25-year-old goaltender, to a 1-year contract with the AV of league minimum. Fanti had his contract rights expire on June 1st by the Edmonton Oilers, so he was then UFA. He could have signed anywhere he wanted to, and he signed in Tampa. So we know the Bolts could definitely have someone who could challenge for a backup role. I don't think Fanti's going to be doing that anywhere in the near future, but maybe in a year or two could be a decent guy who could challenge for a backup role. So interesting note there, but the Bolts did sign Fanti. And then we also saw 3 major extensions for the NHL teams. So first, in the Minnesota Wild organization, they have signed one of their pending UFAs, and that's Marcus Johansson. Johansson, who's a center/left winger, has been working quite well in a bottom 6 role over the past couple of years in the Minnesota Wild organization. Gets a 1-year contract extension with AV of $800,000. Like, for Johansson, given what he can bring, I think $800,000 is a steal of a deal for the Wild. Like, Johansson, who last year put up 11 goals and 34 points in 72 games, is a very fantastic bottom 6 guy. Like we said, can put up between 10 and 15 goals, can put up like 30-ish points. Like, that's not going to be a bad contract there for the Wild, and it's 1 year. So I think this is a really good solid sign there for the Wild to get Johansson on a 1-year extension, and for the money, like, that's a steal for the Minnesota Wild. So interesting note there, but the Wild signed Johansson. Then we saw the All-Stars give a 2-year contract extension out to pending RFA Tyler Kleven. The left shot defenseman gets a 2-year contract extension with the AV of $1.6 million. Now, I thought they would have wanted to sign Kleven to a longer-term deal, given how well he played in the playoffs. And towards the end of the regular season, he had 4 goals, 10 points in 79 games at the NHL level this year. But Kleven's going to be a very fantastic defensive player for the Ottawa Senators for years to come. So I would have liked them to sign him to a longer-term deal, but 2 years, just a $1.6 million AAV is absolutely brilliant stuff there from the Ottawa Senators. And I think this is going to be a very good contract for the next 2 seasons for Ottawa. So interesting note there. But Kleven, who had a really solid season this past year, gets a 2-year extension. And then pending UFA in Tampa Bay, Yanni Gourde got a very long-term extension. This is a little bit of a surprising one in my opinion. But the 33-year-old center/left winger, who had a really solid stint with the Tampa Bay Lightning after being acquired at the trade deadline from the Seattle Kraken, got a 6-year contract extension with an AAV of $2.33 million. So the reason Tampa did this is because they can keep the AAV down for a long period of time. So instead of Gourde getting like a 2-year deal with an AAV of like $3-4 million, he can get a 6-year deal at $2.33. Now he is a very older type player at 33 years old. So this is going to last him until he's 39. So it's a little bit of a concern type contract for the next 2-3 seasons. I think this is going to be a really good steal of a deal for Tampa Bay Lightning later on to the end of that contract. It's not going to be the greatest of deals for Tampa, so I do think Gourde's fit in really well in Tampa throughout his entire career, his first stint and this past year and his second stint in Tampa. I think he's been a really good fit, so I can see why Tampa wants to keep him, but I just think 6 years is a little bit too much. So very interesting note there. But those are all signings from over the past couple of days. Gourde, Kleven, and Johansson have all gotten extensions and should remain NHL players in their systems, while guys like Bjorklund in Washington and Kernasov in LA have also been signed to new deals. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to a couple of injury updates. Not too much here to talk about. So first, with the Florida Panthers, Anton Lundell and Eetu Luostarinen both missed practice before Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. Luostarinen should play, even though he left Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Final due to an undisclosed injury. While Lundell, who did miss practice for unknown reasons, should also play in Game 1. So very interesting note there. While AJ Greer, who's been in and out of the lineup over the past few games in the Eastern Conference Final, will most likely miss Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final with undisclosed injury. So it's a really bad blow there for the Panthers, as Greer is a really solid bottom 6 forward. So interesting note there. But Lundell and Luostarinen should play for the Panthers in the Stanley Cup Final, while Greer will most likely miss Game 1. For the Dallas Stars, it was announced that Rupe Hintz did suffer a foot fracture when Darnell Nurse slashed him on the foot in Game 2. That forced him to miss Game 3. He did play through in Game 4 and Game 5, but was definitely hindered because of it. So interesting note there. It seems like he should be able to be ready for training camp. So interesting note there, but that is the ailment that Rupe Hintz was dealing with. Going over to Nils Lundkvist, there was a mention that Lundkvist, who had a surgery in February, was cleared to practice. He might have been able to get back into the roster if the Western Conference Final went a little bit longer, or if the Stars had made the Stanley Cup Final, but he was at least ready to be practicing, and on top of that, he should be ready for training camp. So very interesting note there. But Lundkvist, who did not play the last half of the regular season plus the entirety of the playoffs due to injury, was nearing a return. So very interesting note there. Well, Edmonton's Connor Brown, who missed the last 2 games of the Western Conference Final due to an upper body injury, is expected to play in Game 1. So that's going to be a big boost there for the Edmonton Oilers to get Connor Brown back. This is a really fantastic bottom 6 guy. So interesting note there. Those are all the injury updates from the past couple of days surrounding teams like the Edmonton Oilers, the Dallas Stars, and the Florida Panthers. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to just a couple of quick updates when it comes to stuff from around the NHL. So first, going over to players that are signing overseas. Brandon Biro, who was a depth player in the Kraken organization this year, signed over in the KHL, so he's going to go play over in Russia. Ilya Safonov, who's a prospect in the Chicago Blackhawks organization, is also going to sign in the KHL. And Drake Cagguila, who had been a depth player in the Edmonton Oilers organization this year, is signing over in the National League. So these are all depth guys that they would have been like maybe 13th, 14th forwards at the NHL level, or probably most likely AHLers. So instead of that, they all go sign overseas, and Safonov, Biro, and Cagguila. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to Ivan Prosvetov. We talked about how Prosvetov has spent the past couple of years overseas. I think it was in the KHL. It might have been a different league, but we said that Prosvetov, who left the NHL, had played in Colorado and Arizona before, left the NHL to go play overseas, wants to get back into the NHL. Apparently, Calgary's a likely landing spot for him, so there's no guarantees Calgary's going to sign him, but we know that Vladar is potentially leaving as a UFA, so they may have an opening coming as a backup to Dustin Wolf. So if they feel like it's a good fit, they could wind up signing Ivan Prosvetov. So no guarantees at this point, but Prosvetov could be heading to Calgary after spending the past couple of years overseas. When it comes to Dallas, after they were eliminated from the playoffs, they put Alex Petrovic on waivers. Petrovic had been a solid third pair guy for the Dallas Stars, but their AHL affiliates are still in the playoffs at this point, so they wanted to give their AHL players a little bit more help. So they placed Petrovic on waivers. He did wind up clearing, not too surprised there. I think he's either on the final year of his deal or he's going to be entering the final year of his deal this offseason, and he's mostly a 6th, 7th guy, and no one could use him in the playoffs anyway, so I don't think it's too much of a surprise that Petrovic was placed on and cleared waivers, and he can now go help the Dallas Stars AHL affiliates. When it comes to Florida, Alexander Barkov recently won 2 trophies. It was announced, I think it was back over on Monday, that Alexander Barkov has won the Selke Trophy and the King Clancy Trophy. Now, the King Clancy Trophy is given out to the player who has the best leadership, I think it was, and off-ice qualities. All teams vote one player, and Barkov wound up winning it, so very interesting note there. Well, the Selke is given out to the best defensive forward. I was also mentioned that Reinhard and Cirelli were 2 of the other finalists, but Barkov, I think that's back-to-back Selke trophies he's now won, wins it again. He's looking really good with the Selke trophy. Like, Bergeron for the longest time was the dominant player in that category, but Barkov has sort of taken over after Bergeron retired. So very interesting note there. I think it was Reinhard who was second in voting, Cirelli was third, so very interesting note there. But Barkov has won another Selke, and he's also won the King Clancy Award, so very interesting note there. When it comes to Carolina, Jesper Fast, who missed the entire season this year due to injuries, has officially retired from the NHL. So Fast had a long stint at the NHL level. He played a couple of seasons with the Rangers, a long stint with the Carolina Hurricanes. I think he's played like over 300-400 games, maybe a little bit more than that. He wasn't an overly productive player, like he wasn't a top 6 guy, but he was a very useful bottom 6 guy for whichever teams had him. So very interesting note there. Fast was a really good player. I wish him the best in retirement, but Fast, who didn't play at all last year due to injuries, is officially retired, so very interesting note there. Well, Peter DeBoer, there's some rumblings out there that after his handling of the situation in the Western Conference Final regarding Jake Ottinger, he could wind up being fired. There's no guarantee it's going to happen, but I've seen a couple of people, including guys like Frank Saravalli and David Pagnotta, saying that DeBoer is going to be entering the final year of his contract as a Stars head coach, and there's some people out there who think that with the Stars and with the way they were very unhappy with the way the Ottinger situation happened in the Game 5 of the Western Conference Final, that some players maybe want a change at the head coaching position, and given the fact that DeBoer only has 1 year left, there's a possibility that sort of thing could happen. Once again, no guarantees by any means that Peter DeBoer gets fired because he is still under contract, but it's something we're going to have to monitor over the next maybe week or two to see if Jim Nill does wind up going the firing route of Peter DeBoer. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But those are all the updates from our past couple of days. Those are some interesting pieces of news with some players who signed over in the KHL. The Flames may have some interest in bringing in Ivan Prosvetov. Alex Petrovic cleared waivers. Barkov won the Selke and the Clancy trophies. Fast has retired from the NHL. And Peter DeBoer could be fired at some point later this offseason. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. And when it comes to trade rumors, we've got a couple of things to talk about here. We want to start off with the New York Rangers. According to Elliot Friedman, I think it was on one of his recent 32 Thoughts podcasts, he says the next few weeks is going to be a prime opportunity to keep your eye on the New York Rangers. He says that Chris Drury is open to receiving offers on some players that he has potentially out there, and Elliot Friedman says that do not be surprised if we start to see a lot of action when it comes to the Rangers. We've heard from Elliot Friedman himself that Keandre Miller could be being shopped at this point. We've also heard Chris Kreider's name out there. We've heard Mika Zibanejad's name be out there, and there are a couple of other guys. I mean, we've heard some people say that maybe Panarin could be a guy who could be traded. So there's probably a couple of really big opportunities out there for the Rangers to make some big blockbuster moves. I'm not sure how many of these guys are actually going to get traded, but Elliot Friedman does say keep your eye on the New York Rangers, and I can definitely see why, as they're a team who missed the playoffs this year after going to the Eastern Conference Final the year prior, and they're definitely going to want to make it back to the playoffs next year. So keep your eye on the Rangers, as there's a very likely chance we could see multiple moves happen in the very near future. A quick update when it comes to the Dallas Stars. Matt Duchene was recently talking talking. He says that his intent is to stay in Dallas, but he's also said that he wants to sign a longer-term deals. He's been signing one-year deals over the past couple of years in Dallas, and it's worked out well for him. Duchene's been a fantastic fit with the Dallas Stars, and it's enough that he wants to stay with the Dallas Stars. But according to a couple of recent reports, Duchene is trying to look for some more stability on his next contract, so he's probably going to be looking for like a 2 to 4 year deal, not just another 1 year contract with Dallas. So if the Stars can swing it cap-wise, I think they would definitely want to try and bring back Matt Duchene, but they are one of the teams who are in a bit of a pickle when it comes to the cap, so we'll have to wait and see if the Stars do wind up keeping Duchene or not, but it definitely seems like his preference is to stay in Dallas if he can get it on a longer term deal, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the Vegas Golden Knights, more and more reports coming out. I think Pagnotta's mentioned this, I think Chris Johnston's mentioned this, and there were a couple of other people out there too who have mentioned this, saying that Nick Hague is drawing a ton of attention on the trade market in Vegas. Hague is a third pair defenseman. He was one of the original draft picks from the Vegas Golden Knights' original draft in 2017. So that's very interesting to note there. Hague has been probably the best prospect that the Knights have been able to keep. But he's coming off a contract where he had $2.9 million. He's an RFA. And the Knights, if they really want to go after one of the bigger fish in free agency, are going to need some cap space. I don't think they're going to be able to pay Hague the $3.5–4 million he probably wanted on his next deal. So given that fact, I think Hague has a very lucky chance to get moved. Any team who I think has a little bit of cap space and could definitely use a guy who can maybe play second pair minutes on the left side, I think would have tons of interest in Nick Hague. And I think Hague has been sort of boxed out the top 4 in Vegas, and I think on another team could thrive in a second pair role. So I don't think it's a guarantee by any means that Vegas moves Hague, but I think it's a very, very likely possibility with the route that Vegas is going right now. So keep your eye on Nick Hague over the next couple of weeks. Very likely chance Vegas tries to move him, and with them needing cap space, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just for picks and prospects. So I'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the Carolina Hurricanes, Elliotte Friedman, mentioning on his recent 32 Thoughts podcast, was talking about the Carolina Hurricanes, mentioning that they want 2 things potentially this offseason. One is a clear-cut superstar. He says that they don't have that next level goal scoring ability that other teams like the Edmonton Oilers and even to some extent the Florida Panthers have. So he says that they may try and go hard after some of the superstars like a Mitch Marner in free agency or some big trade in the offseason to try and get more talent on this team, and I can completely agree with that. While the Canes do have some really good players like an Aho, a Jarvis, a Svechnikov, they don't have that next level finishing player. They might have had it for a little bit in Gensel the year prior, but he left as a free agent last offseason. So it's going to be very interesting to note there, but keep your eye on Carolina when it comes to maybe Mitch Marner or some other top-end talent player. Meanwhile, Elliotte Friedman also mentioned that they could also be looking for some bigger and heavier type players to sort of try and play that Florida-style hockey. We saw Florida, how they really bullied around the Carolina Hurricanes. Aho, Jarvis, like they were throwing them all over the place. So whether that be a guy like Tanner Jeannot, maybe someone on the trade market, Sam Bennett if they're looking for some talent too. Like there's a couple of players out there who are bigger, who sort of have that more physical side to their game. So keep your eye on the Carolina Hurricanes when it comes to maybe adding a next level superstar on top of maybe trying to get some more bigger players, some heavier players to sort of throw the body around, maybe in their bottom 6 or in their top 6. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to Buffalo Sabres and Vancouver Canucks, according to David Pagnotta, the fourthperiod.com, he says that he thinks the Buffalo Sabres may circle back and try and re-engage with Vancouver in Elias Pettersson talks. There was a lot of talk in season when Elias Pettersson rumors were circulating that Buffalo is a very likely landing spot. I still think Buffalo could be a solid landing spot for Elias Pettersson, but I'm not sure it's a guarantee he gets moved there. On top of that, Elliotte Friedman also come out and said that the Canucks really know what the offers are for Elias Pettersson and what other teams want to pay for him, and he says that there's a really strong possibility that the Canucks want to try and make something work with Elias Pettersson long term. They don't want to try and move him, so it's going to be a very interesting situation. Elias Pettersson, I think, will stay personally. I think he will stay. I don't think any other team is going to take on that $11 million contract, and I think the Canucks are really just going to have to try and work with Pettersson to try and move forward and try and get him out of this sort of slump that he was in this past year where he only put up like 45 points. So it'll be interesting to note there, but David Pagnotta does say that Buffalo might circle back on him, while Elliotte Friedman does say that they want to try and work things out with Pettersson instead of trading him. And lastly here, going over to the Minnesota Wild. When it comes to the Wild, there have been a lot of mentions about Marco Rossi. Now, the first thing I want to mention is Marco D'Amico was talking about this recently and said that the contract for Marco Rossi is probably the biggest sticking point right now in trade talks. He says that the Philadelphia Flyers had some major interest in Marco Rossi, but after sort of talking negotiations with the Minnesota Wild and what Rossi might try and look for in a contract, it sort of seems like the Flyers shut down those sorts of talks. According to the Amico, he says that Rossi at this point is sort of looking for a 7x7 deal, which personally I think is a little bit high. He says that he thinks that the Wild have offered Rossi a 5x5 deal, so a little bit less term, $2 million less on the AAV. I think that's a little bit more reasonable for Rossi. Like, he had a good year this year, putting up 60 points. I'm not sure if he's a $7 million player, maybe somewhere between the $5.5 million range, but not 7. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But the Amico says that the contract of Rossi wanting somewhere around 7x7 is a big sticking point in the trade rumor mill. Well, Chris Johnson does say that Calgary, Vancouver, the New York Rangers, Boston, Buffalo, and Montreal are a few of the landing spots potentially for Rossi should he wind up getting dealt. And there's still a very likely possibility that happens. Even a 5x5, that's a little bit pricey in the Minnesota Wild organization. So we know Calgary could use a second line center, Vancouver could use a second line center. The Rangers are a little bit more confusing, but they could definitely use a younger type player. We know Boston could use a center. We know Buffalo's just trying to change up the mix. I could see him have some interest in a younger guy like Rossi. And we know that Montreal could be using a second line center. So like, most of those guys in my opinion make sense. Montreal, Boston, Vancouver, Calgary, more than the Rangers and the Sabres. But those could be some very interesting landing spots for Marco Rossi if the contract situation can work. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But according to the Amico, the contract's a big problem for Rossi in being traded or signing with the Minnesota Wild. And according to Chris Johnson, those are 6 teams that could be potential landing spots for Marco Rossi. So definitely we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But that's what I'm gonna talk about for today. Those are all the trade rumors. I'd love your guys' thoughts. Do you think Rossi gets moved? What sort of contract does he get? And where do you think he goes? Do you think Buffalo could try and acquire Elias Pettersson? Or do you think Vancouver could try and keep Elias Pettersson? Do you think the Canes will add some more bigger, heavier type players as well as a superstar? Do you think that the Vegas Golden Knights could move Nick Hague this offseason? Do you think Matt Duchene stays with the Stars? Will they give him a multi-year contract extension? And do you think that the New York Rangers are going to be making a lot of big moves this offseason? Definitely your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below, as well as the news updates, the injury updates, and the signings. Definitely your thoughts on all of that. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you'd like to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. It really does help out our channel. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below. And don't forget to stay tuned for my June 27th, June 28th, and July 1st live stream. I also do a blog to make news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. The link to that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.